All right. Hi. You just missed a very strong talking to. Not that it's going to do us any good, but we did have a talking to. Okay. Talking about the first New Deal today. Okay. Here we go. All right. That's why it's so quiet. It will pick back up in a given time. I'd say 3 sentences in, and it'll be like Central Park out here on a beautiful spring day.
You're just trying to
There we go. See there? That's all it took. That was all it took. All right. The New Deal refers to a number, and we're talking about the first New Deal today. Why do you think it might have been called the first New Deal?
Because it was the first New Deal.
Yeah, because there was another one. Yeah.
Another.
It's kind of like the first, World War I was not referred to as World War I until World War II happened. It was the Great War, the World War, but it wasn't referred to as WW1 because it was the only one. So if this had been just a New Deal, and that would have been it, it wouldn't have been known as the first New Deal. So that obviously that means that there was a second part to it. Okay?
How many New Deals?
2. The New Deal referred to a number of U.S. government programs that was put into law to help the country recover from the Great Depression. Okay? The New Deal programs that was passed during the first 2 years that Franklin Roosevelt was president was sometimes called the first New Deal. Okay? Now, your paper says you can go here to read about the second New Deal. You can punch that all day long, but it's not going to take you anywhere. Okay? It's a piece of paper. But tomorrow I will hand you out the second New Deal. And we can look at it then. I know. Okay? In the first 100 days that President Roosevelt was in office, he wanted to get things started quickly because remember, the economy is suffering, people are suffering, so he's trying to get something going quick. So during the first 100 days that he was president, he issued several executive orders and helped to get many laws passed through Congress. Anybody remember how many he got passed that first little bit?
15.
15. 15 laws. Now that's 15 laws. That means that they actually went through Congress and was voted on
How many did Biden
and all of that. President Biden has wrote executive orders, which Roosevelt did too. Most presidents do. They're not technically law, and they can be challenged in court by states and things. But an executive order is not law. Because in order for it to become a law, it actually has to go through the process of becoming law. Okay. Banking reform, one of the first things that President Roosevelt did was to close the banks. Remember, not all banks closed. A lot of them closed for good during the Great Depression, right? But a lot of, you had a number that stayed open and people still had money in it. Well, he closes them, but not for good. And I'm sure, though, people probably panicked a little bit when he said, okay, we're going to close the banks. Because they probably panicked if you had money in there because they remember everyone losing all their money. So it probably did send a little bit of fear through people for a second. But they called it a banking holiday. And what Congress did then was they passed a law called the Emergency Banking Act. And this law allowed the banks to reopen, but they were under the supervision of the federal treasury, and they still are to this day. It helped to stabilize the banks and to bring back confidence in the banking system. So the government didn't necessarily take over the banks, but they put rules in place to make sure that what had happened during the Great Depression should not happen again. Okay? And they insure the money and things of that nature, but they put regulations in. And banks to this day, you have people from the Treasury Department comes by and does bank audits to make sure that their books are up to speed, that no one is swindling people out of money, and that they're following all the rules and all that stuff. Okay. The stock market, of course, we all know that it plummeted and people lost everything they had. So in 1933, they passed the Security Act, okay? And that was passed to help prevent another stock market crash. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not going to dip way down and you're going to lose money if if you had stock and all of a sudden it was worth $100 a share and the stock market drops really far, then that $100 share now might only be worth $50. But it will, most of the time, it does rebound. We did that in 2008. You guys might not remember that, considering was you born in 2008? I'm just kidding. But it did. The stock market was going along pretty good, but the bottom fell out, and it dropped way down. Okay, because my retirement fund was riding along pretty well, and then all of a sudden one day it wasn't. But then it slowly, over the years, came back to the point that it's higher than it was. So that's the way the stock market goes. It isn't up and down. That's what we talk about. Don't invest money you can't afford to lose, or you panic and you pull it out for a loss. You got to sometimes you got to let it ride and see what happens. Not that I'm an expert at investment, okay, but I'm just saying. A lot of people does panic. But anyway, the Security Act of 1933 required public trading companies to provide accurate information to the public, including profits, losses, corporate officers of the company, all of that stuff. It kept me from starting a business and going public and selling stock, and my business might be worth $10,000, but I sell stock for worth $100,000. Okay, I can't do that. You can't sell stock for more than what your business is worth. Okay, so it kind of stops some of that, which protects your money. Because if I go belly up at $10,000, then there's no way I could ever take care of that $100,000 that people invested, right? And why would they invest $100,000 into a $10,000 business? See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I'm ripping people off. So this stops me from being able to rip people off, supposedly. But there's always a way. All right. Now, no, isn't that comforting to know? Hey, people can. I'm seriously. Some people can always come up with a way around the rules. It seems like. President Roosevelt put in the measure that would repeal on prohibition. Okay. He repealed prohibition. Okay. Remember, it was illegal to buy, sell, transport anything alcohol. Well, he did away with that. And the 21st Amendment was ratified that did away with prohibition. But by doing that, they can now tax, because it's legal for companies or bars and things to open back up and sell alcohol, they can tax it.
Yes,
And alcohol is taxed pretty heavy.
Yeah.
Gas is taxed pretty heavy. It's like 40, and I think North Carolina, it's like 43, 45 cents for every gallon is actually taxed that the state gets, the DOT gets to help keep up the roads and things like that. But everything you buy is taxed. You guys know that. You go buy a shirt, you buy a shirt for $10, it's going to cost you $10.70. Okay, because there's 7 cents tax on each dollar you buy. There's like a 7% tax. So everything is taxed. But that's how the state gets money
If you buy
to
something
run.
that's like
Yeah.
$180, then it'll probably be like 186.
I remember when I got my computer, the
Be
tax
at least
was like
187, well, about $113 probably. $193. So, okay, all right. Then, okay. Well, they say there's an old saying: there's only 2 things in life that you're guaranteed: taxes and death. Okay, so it's a bad joke, but it's a lot of truth to it. I'll say. All right. The president began a large program for public works and created the Public Work Administration. And it was called the PWA. Remember, we had talked about this was the alphabet administration. Everything was given a big name and then it went by the initials. So the Public Work Administration was PWA. And this program built things like roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, and dams across the country. These programs provided jobs for many people, okay? Then you had the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC. also created many jobs for people, and they worked on environmental projects. They, in like national parks, things like that. They were the ones who planted the trees. The guys who worked in the CCC had to be single because they traveled pretty much around the country doing all the work, and they did not want to take a married man away from his wife and children for long stretches of time. So he got other jobs. If you were married, you could get another job, hopefully with one of the government agencies. But the CCC was usually for single men that could be away from home. They didn't have a wife and children.
That'd probably be a good job in the Great Depression since the government's, you're sort of
Oh,
working
yeah,
for the
I mean,
government.
I think it would have been a great job if you were 21, 22 years old and single. I think
Get
that
to
was,
travel.
you got to travel around the states, doing
The
work,
country.
getting paid.
Yeah.
I think that'd have been a pretty good job. So, hard work, I'm sure. To help farmers out, you have the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, the AAA, okay? And it was put into place, and it helped to improve farming practices, reduce farm production to raise prices, and it gave a voice to farmers in the government. So it was, it was kind of trying to help with overproduction, things of that nature. And then housing, in order to get the housing industry going again, because you got to figure when everybody loses everything, people are not building new homes, people are not buying homes because they don't have the money. So in order to get that industry going again, 2 new agencies were formed, okay? The Homeowners Loan Corporation, the HOLC, and the Federal Housing Administration, FHA, and that's still around today. The HOLC was formed to help refinance mortgages, okay? Because when people couldn't make their payments, they fell behind, and if they didn't lose their home, they were probably about to. So this helped them to refinance it, probably got payments that they could indeed afford to make so they didn't lose their homes, okay? I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought because Alex and Van is sitting there working on something together, and I lost my thought for a second. They don't realize that I help with baseball, apparently, and I can make them run additional laps. Anyway, the FHA put government standards on the construction of homes to make sure that homes were safe. It also helped to ensure mortgages and stabilize the house market. In other words, they kind of, again, they put rules and regulations onto homes that you were building. You don't think about that, but your house actually has to pass a series of inspections as it is being built. The plumbing,
Oh, yeah. I
the
know.
wiring, the framework,
The
the
sewer.
foundation,
Using the sewer.
sewer, all the water works, all that stuff has to pass various inspections. People are not just allowed to go out and throw up some haphazard house and sell it. Okay, it's got to have the proper insulation for the area. There's a lot of stuff that goes into play now into building a home, and it's for the safety and the protection of the person that is buying the house.
What about a big building like Caldwell? Like
Same
this?
thing.
Like
They all
it
have
had-
to pass inspections and everything. Absolutely. Anything built has to meet the standards of today. They sure do.
Back
Okay.
in the old days, did you have to, if you were building like a stone house?
Do what?
Like,
Any house that is built has to be.
Your
Yeah.
stone
The only
house
way
is
you could
bad.
build something and live in it was if you owned some land
Frontiers.
and you just went out and built yourself a little house on that land somewhere. And you didn't, you bypassed inspection, but then when it burned down or got blown over because of a strong wind or something,
No.
you're not gonna be able to get insurance on it
Yeah.
because it didn't pass.
I made a teepee and it fell down. I built half of it.
Okay.
Me and my brother.
All right, now then, I told you it wouldn't take long for it to come back.
I got a house.
All right. The Federal Emergency Relief Administration provided help for the unemployed. It built soup kitchens to feed people. It provided blankets to the homeless. lunches for schools, and it educated people on how to get jobs, okay? It wasn't like a training program, but it did help people, probably did help train some. It helped them to understand what, how to apply for jobs, how to get jobs, things of that nature. Because that's another one of those things, even today, we just assume everybody knows how to do a resume, and that's kind of sweet. Okay? In a sad kind of way. Okay? Interesting facts about the first New Deal. 15 major new laws were passed during Roosevelt's first 100 days of office. Okay? The New Deal is sometimes referred to as alphabet soup because it started many new government agencies that went by the letters. Okay? Some of the examples are the AAA, which was the Agriculture Adjustment Administration, the FHA, Federal Housing Administration. Okay? You also had the National Industry Recovery Act that provided the rights of workers to form unions and to strike. Remember, up to this point in time, if they went on strike, if workers went on strike, then they would either send in what they called scabs to cross the line and take the jobs, and those people were just without a job, or they would ask sometime, if you remember, they would send in hired thugs to go out and beat them up, the leaders up, to try to make everyone else come back to work. So there wasn't really any protection for the workers. So this kind of goes in and it helps protect the workers. It gives them some rights. States becomes what they refer to as a right to work state, things of that nature, which means you do have rights. I know everybody says, well, why didn't they just quit? Well,
That's
if you got a wife and 4 or 5 kids, and jobs are not readily available, you can't quit this job and just go walking next door and get another job. You kind of have to put up with a lot of stuff because you got to feed your family. So it's not as easy as you might think sometimes. The Tennessee Valley Authority Act, the TVA, built dams along the Tennessee River, provided jobs, controlled flooding, and provided cheap power to people in Tennessee. And again, remember, back in this day, not everyone has electricity. Okay, my mom grew up in the 30s, and they did not have electricity until she was on up in age a little bit, because they was a very rural area, first of all. But she talked about how they had, they didn't have indoor plumbing or any of that stuff, obviously. But they heated with a wood stove, and the little kerosene lanterns is what they used for light at night. And if you've ever seen those can be very dangerous, especially in a house that
a log cabin
was built, was basically built by my grandfather and his dad, built this little 4-room house.
And you refrigerated your food.
So these things, but my mom would tell stories about how when her dad would go to light one, that sometimes the oil build up and that thing would just blaze up.
And then it
And he would and it would catch on fire, and he would have to grab it and go out, run out the door and throw it out in the yard, which of course destroyed the lantern because they're made of glass. So when you threw it out in the yard to keep from burning the house down, you broke your lantern, so it was not an easy time. All right, that's about 19 minutes of your life that you will never get back.
Yeah.